Good evening and welcome to Gunner Shot. Gunner Shot में आप सबका स्वागत है. Vanakkam, Pranam and Jai Hind. Today we're going to talk of China's perception of India. What does China think of us? After all, as you see in this picture, Ganesha is sitting tight on the dragon's tail and holding it down. And that is generally the perception not only in China, but all over the world. But then we'll get into the intricacies of this. And to talk about all this, I have with me General Vinod Bhatia and Brigadier Arun Sahgal. Sirs, good evening and welcome to Gunner Shot on a very interesting topic.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very
It's
much.
always
Good evening to you and to all your viewers.
Yeah.
And good evening,
So-
Sahgal sir.
Good evening, sir.
Uh, I must tell everyone at the outset that this is a very important discussion because most of the time we know ourselves. We don't know the other side. As like someone said, a great general once said, admiral once said, it is always good to know what's on the other side of the hill. And what do the Chinese think of us? We know what we think of ourselves. We generally know what we think of the Chinese. But do we know what the Chinese think of ourselves? What is their perception of India as it rises? Now, when you look at the media reports coming, everything, of late, a few people have come up with the idea of a Bharat narrative. The Chinese people have written of a rising India and India becoming a global power and a major power with which it has to deal on a, I wouldn't say equal footing, but where China has to consider dealing with India differently. That's one narrative which is of late come, and it has found some resonance in our media with our writers also. But then there is a deep rooted issue, okay, and in which that also comes through in many writings of theirs that India is beset with a colonial hangover. It's got too many rituals. It's got too many languages, too many religious, and too many ethnic problems. And it's got tremendous fault lines despite its economic rise. And, India is something which should be kept where it is supposed to be kept. But in all conditions, whether it is one strain of thought or the other strain of thought, what is very clear that the equations are changing. The equations which existed in the 50s changed in the 80s, 90s, changed in the first decade of the century, and now post pandemic and post Eastern Ladakh to 2020, and the events thereafter in the past 4 5 years, this change is dramatic. And as India rises, right, the other contender for Asian supremacy or dominance or the other big power in Asia is China. And two big countries, two big civilizations, right? Almost one third of the global population have to live with each other. There's no choice. In this context, it is important for us to know what the Chinese perceptions are so that we know how to deal with them. So, with this as a backdrop, what we'll do now, sir, is I'd request each of you to give your macro perceptions of what the Chinese think of us in the next 4 to 5 minutes each. And then we'll take a few issues where I'll seek each of your, views, and then we'll take it forward, and then we'll throw it to the audience. So first, I'll request Brigadier Arun Sahgal, sir, you may take the lead and give your macro view of the Chinese perceptions of India. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, General Shankar. As usual, it's a pleasure to be interacting on your extremely important and vibrant channel. I have my first fundamental point is the perception that the Chinese think themselves of a superior power and a player is, I think, in my mind, is misperceived in our discourse. There is a huge amount of chatter which is destabilizing their thinking, and there are a couple of reasons for that. There are concerns rising within the Chinese academic circles, their policy circles, as well as onto Weibo chats and other areas where there is a discussion going on how to deal with India. The first point which I like to highlight is that India's growing population, which is taken over to the as number one populated country in the world. It is not the question of only population. The important thing of this is that A, India is always been an internalized market. India does not have to develop external export oriented markets primarily for its own growth. So from the Chinese perspective, that Indian markets and Indian consumption model is something which India does not have to depend so much on globalization. The problem for the Chinese is there's a due circulation model that attempts to create an internal market forces has not actually worked so well. So there is a concern that in next 10 years, large Indian workforce will be created as a part of this India's population growth story will replace China's success, denying Chinese population the ability to use market forces to be able to sustain their economic growth. Added to that is the declining population of the Chinese. You have also discussed this issue in your writings as to how, despite the efforts being made to fast rate the growth, the simple point is that the Chinese are not producing enough number of Chinese. There are not enough babies coming up because there are a large number of both social and the factors of, for example, most Chinese families live in 1.5 bedroom apartments. They simply cannot afford it. And then, of course, there are the other dependencies, social character. Third issue is there is now a thinking within the Chinese, and there's a huge amount of chatter on that, is that Indians is leveraging its technology to for economic development, and the digital India is making India a great success story with a much higher degree of penetration than the Chinese. So they are looking at this whole issue is that India internal markets, internal consumption model, large workforce, and the fact is the reach out of the Indian economy is becoming much larger, despite a lot of people in our country, underplaying this huge issue. Uh, 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 that is being seen by the Chinese as some kind of a disconcerting development. Added to that is the whole issue of decoupling and de-risking, which they see as a consequence of that, a large amount of global growth and global companies are shifting over to India, Apple and other issues. And also, India is now investing in large amount in greenfield technologies. For example, our entire budget for this chip manufacture, semiconductors, is equivalent to our entire outlay on our education sector. So that's big ticket investments are being made by India, and this is unnerving the Chinese. The last point in this whole issue is the GDP, the growth potential. Now, the question which the Chinese are facing is this: is as India's GDP grows, and it touches about 7 to 8% consistently over the next 5 to 10 years, there'll be a huge shift of global investment and manufacturing into India. This would basically imply that this will be at the cost of the Chinese. And this is something which is unnerving the Chinese thinking. The second is the Indian manufacturing risk. The first point which the Chinese are questioning themselves is this: is how come India has managed a very spirited post-COVID economic recovery, whereas we, who had all the fundamentals in place, have failed. Second issue is that there is another area which is disturbing the Chinese. Given India's economic growth model, given the fact that India is not going to become a huge global manufacturing hub, large number of Chinese companies, particularly in the energy space, dockyards, heavy engineering, are keen to enter into the Indian manufacturing sector. They are keen to set up shop in India. They look at India as a potential area from where they can do business and grow. This is the story similar to how China became the manufacturing hub for the Japanese as well as the Koreans and other and the Americans. So that's one issue. But there is a concern. There is a concern is that Prime Minister Modi's government, they believe, is using a four-step strategy against the Chinese: use, catch up, export, and replace. And in their thinking is that the Chinese are concerned that India is not only looking for only export-oriented manufacturing systems over, they want the entire supply chains to be deployed, located in India. This is what the Chinese are very concerned about. So there is a discourse that is emerging within China is stop looking at trade and technology wars with the United States alone. Pay attention to what is happening in India. And therefore, they are now trying to, I move to my next point is trying to couple the Indo-American relationships as a new game changer and a very adversarial development for the Chinese. So the problem for the Chinese is this is that they are looking at India and US leveraging their combined power against China to neutralize Chinese military and economic superiority. That's an important thing. Netizens, as well as the strategic community, for example, are subscribing to a very interesting. There is a very interesting discourse in the Chinese net. The situation in Yangtze, which developed on 9 December 2022, is being directly linked to exercise Yuddha Vyas, I think it was called, carried out by India and
In
United States
Himachal.
forces. Huh? And,
Yes, sir.
yeah, Yuddha
Himachal.
Vyas in close to the LAC.
Yes, sir.
That Yangtze issue was perceived as a Chinese desperate reaction to showcase to the Indians and the Americans that there is a problem and the Chinese are present and you cannot override us. But the fact of the matter is that the growing China India US partnership in military
Relationships.
cooperation is a concern which is bothering them a lot. It is not only the US military cooperation that is worrying them. There is another area of concern is that the interdependence between Chinese and US economy to transform the upgradation sector has come awry. But there is another area. Chinese were trying to use their low-end technological capabilities by creating inroads into India, and this inroads was basically to stabilize the economic models of the southwestern China, where there are less number of industries. The idea was to try and ensnare India into RCEP as well as BRI. And
Mhm.
once India becomes a partner of that, then the joint collaborative uh, in manufacturing as well as trade will help them to build up the resources of the southwestern China, which is industrially underdeveloped. That has not happened. In fact, what has happened instead is that India is becoming an improved manufacturing hub on its own and is developing at a much farther potential. We also have to understand one thing. Chinese are not bothered about Vietnam becoming a new manufacturing hub. Not only a supply chain backend. The problem for the Chinese is that Vietnam can never provide that kind of a growth potential that India can. So therefore, and they have seen how the model of Apple simply moving into India and having 1,000 crore profit in first year can work out. And tomorrow, once we have the other greenfield industries as well as the older other industries with additional investments coming up from internationally, that will upset them more. So the question is that they are saying it is not only the technological and economic decoupling and de-risking of the West. India is also a part and parcel of it. So you will now find in future that China going to WTO and other places will bring India as a co-conspirator with the West. And my last point is on the border dispute is the Chinese have a big dilemma. The dilemma is status quo versus status quo ante. There are four reasons for it. Number one is Chinese are aware that Ukraine has indicated that there is nothing known as revolution in military affairs. Revolution in military affairs is by and large a dud concept. It is basically an innovation in military affairs where technology is being leveraged selectively towards means to an end. But essentially, the war remains an attritional war. Number two, there are a large number of articles appearing inside the Chinese which are which are causing about talking about the 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 kind of equipment which is being developed by the Chinese, and secondly, as we are all aware of the fighting potential. They are questioning the ability of the modern Chinese conscript soldier to be able to handle the kind of high tech equipment which is being there. And the second thing is this high tech equipment has never been used under stressful combat conditions, and therefore they feel that it is they do not know. And then added to that is a large standing army which has never not been deployed, who does only flying and sailing around the Taiwan, is being getting increasingly prone to corruption. So that is where the whole issue lies. And if you notice, of late, Xi Jinping has been talking very seriously of looking at these discrepancies within the forces of the PLA. And we all aware of the fact that how some elements of PLA rocket force are talking about the fact is that instead of using fuel, they have been using water in their this thing. I mean that may be some kind of a simile, but the fact of the matter is that there are serious problems. So all
Issues.
these
Yeah.
things are forcing Chinese to relook at the escalation model with India. And in the bargain, what is happening is then I go back to the Indo-US Connect. And while we what relationship we have with the US on these issues is a separate point. But from the perspective of the Chinese, that this connect matters, and the connect has serious strategic implications for China. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, so thanks. That was quite brilliant, to be very honest. I think the most brilliant sentence which you used is the Chinese are producing anything, everything, but the Chinese are not producing enough Chinese. That's the problem China has, right? Unless China is able to produce enough Chinese,
Hmm.
their consumption is going to decrease, the workforce is going to decrease, and on the other hand, you just exposed it to the fact that the reverse is happening in India, where we've overtaken their population, we have a workforce, and everything and everything and everything. And the important part which you have mentioned with the Chinese must be finding it very difficult, which I've actually so far never looked at it this point way, is that our population supports or rise through internal consumption, which the Chinese are struggling to do.
Yes.
You take any uh, commentator, he says today China is not able to consume, and hence its GDP is not going to grow or it's going to decline, and it has already entered deflation, right? And the view, of course, is that India's growth is at the cost of China, is the macro issue which is dominating their thinking, which is, there's no doubt about it. And the fact that Chinese investment is barred from entering India. Because the Chinese have, like you rightly said, they've exploited Japan, they've exploited Korea, they've exploited Taiwan, and even USA to a large extent. And what must be worrying them, which I think you again put it out very importantly, is the lack of leverage which they have due to the minimal, in fact, the lack of presence or lack of uh, their entry into India through the BRI or the RCEP, right? And then, of course, the elephant in their room is the emerging and the burgeoning India-China relation, India-US relationship, and which is something which is important. And then their problem, the problem of the PLA. In fact, sir, today I spoke on a Japanese channel, and I just echoed. It's called Jonan Sukasa Jonan channel, right? He's an economic commentator, but he made me speak on PLA, and this is what I told them. And this message is in Japan today, that the fighting potential of the PLA is suspect. They might have the best of equipment, it is not tried, and the fighting potential of the Chinese to carry out complicated maneuvers either in the high altitude or across the Taiwan Strait is suspect. So I think we've got a very good view from you. Thank you, sir. Sir, General Bhatia, sir, all yours. Your view about how the Chinese perceive India.
Thank you, Jan Shankar. Thank you, Brig Arun Sahgal. I think that was excellent. Absolutely, it's a learning process for me. It's an excellent subject you've chosen for today. Normally we speak of India's China India challenge, China India policy, China India strategy, but today we're talking about China's perception of India. So let me start on a lighter note. Let me start with the Kushwant Singh joke. And the joke, of course, is not directly with China, but there was a American, there was a Frenchman, there was an Indian and a Chinese, and they were asked a question. And the question is, what do you think of honest democracy in the rest of the world? So the Frenchman says, I don't know English. The Chinese says, I don't know what is democracy. Indian, unfortunately, it's true, but that's what the joke is. Says, I don't know what is honesty. And the Americans say, I don't know the rest of the world. So China is now aping the US. It does not know the rest of the world, right? So when you talk about China's perception in India, it's a very interesting one. It's like the line of actual control. There's no common understanding. Right.
That's a good one, sir.
Yeah, honestly, that's how I feel. We have India's perception of LAC, the Chinese perception of LAC, the Indian perception, Chinese perception of LAC, and the Chinese perception, Indian perception of LAC. So they're total this thing. So let me try and make some sense in it on whatever I think. Of course, Brig Arun Sahgal has given an excellent one. Let me put in the context. India-China relations. The India-China relations is a set of contradictions. It is competition, it is confrontation, it is conflict on one hand. It is cooperation and commerce on the other hand. Right? Seeing this, what does China actually perceive India? Does it perceive India to be weak? Does India perceive India to be a democracy which doesn't function? Which is the Chinese perception, not China's perception. There are different Chinese perception and China's perception. Okay. But China gives out to their own people because it's the three warfare strategies: high wars, public opinion, and legal warfare. But in fact, I think China is looking. Let me grant to the Chinese, they are smart and they're looking very long and very deep. Right? When I say very long and very deep, and that's my perception, and I hope I am not wrong. China challenges the US right now. It challenges the US for a bipolar world. But I suppose in the long run, it also perceives that the main competition will come from India, right? So when if main competition from India when I say tomorrow, maybe day after and the day after, in a couple of centuries, because it looks long, it has to contain India for the present, right? So I feel that China perceives two poles to be threatening China's interests. One, the US and the West, led by the US, and second is India, right? And why does it do that? Like Brigadier Sahgal rightly put it, India is a risen, responsible, resurgent nation, a regional leader and a global leader, a regional partner, global leader, right? So China does not like that. China, it does not do anything without design. It follows Sun Tzu, it follows strategy, and China's designs have to be understood. And I think we are trying to understand that. You've written an excellent article, a couple of last week in the Financial Express on China's perception. I think everyone who follows Ganesh should read, others also should read it. So the point remains: what does China think of India? China is practicing smart power. It has gone beyond the soft power, the hard power, and the sharp power, as they call it. It is practicing smart power, and that is where India is the only nation which has had the will to stand up to China, the BRI, because BRI includes CPC and CPC passes through a territory among all the nations. Like Brigadier Sahgal rightly put it, there's an interdependence between China and US. Right? There is no interdependence between us. We share a border, and we share a contested border, a disputed border. And that is where China thinks it can put the pressure on India. The only thing that China has saying, the mistrust of India is on one side, but we also look at the positives. When I said cooperation and I use the word
Commerce.
cooperation, commerce. Look at the cooperation. We are part of the BRICS. We are part of the SCO, which is of course China led. We are also part of the RIC, which is not really dead as yet. Okay, so he is keeping all options open. On the one hand, he is trying to be aggressive on the line of actual control. On the other hand, he's trying to dominate the Indian Ocean, contain India in its own region, whether it's a neighboring region, whether Nepal, whether it's Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Maldives, we discussed that earlier. So China is actually looking very deep, and at the same time, it says, let's forget the LAC. Let us talk about trade. Okay, so it's a very smart one, and India has, I think, done very well to understand China. I don't think China understands India, but India is trying to understand China, and I think we're doing a great job of it. Let's give some credit. So when we talk of that, let me now come to the when you talk of perception, uh, it is a bully trying to perceive India as weak, and that is how I think we gave them back at Galwan, and with the equitable and proportional deployment, which people call mirror deployment in 2020. I think now China is looking at a face-saving exit, which does not have. And you covered it. PLA does not have the will to fight. It doesn't have experience to fight. It has never fought a war. The last war it fought was 1979. We know what happened in 1979. You go back. It has never fought a successful war, much like many other nations also. But the fact remains that China is a military power. It's a technological power. It's an economic power. It's a geopolitical power. We should not deny that. We should never underestimate China. I find a lot of our writings, and especially the US, trying to underestimate China. No, we should never try. We never underestimate adversity whatsoever. Happen what. And China's perception of India is now changing and changing for the good, not the Chinese perception. Okay, they're different. Chinese people perceive India as different. But China's perception now is more pragmatic and it sees India as a global leader. That is how you find the Bharat narrative. You find some excellent articles, praising India coming up. They are praising a service center. They're looking at democratic dividend. They're looking at commerce. India as a market. So I think we find a change in the Chinese way of perceiving India. Also, there is a problem on the line of actual control. There's a disputed border, and there is a containment of India which China will continue to pursue. I'm not denying that, and that we should be prepared of. We should understand China's strategic intent. How does China perceive India is based on Chinese strategic intent. It is you cannot divorce the two. Strategic intent is to contain India. Strategic intent to be Asian power. Studying intent is a bipolar world, right? Studying intent is to have nations which respect China, and it is not happening because they don't invest in the people, unlike India. In India, we invest in the people. So that is where I think China has got to perceive India as a nation which is growing and it does not want it to grow. And if we do not get the Chinese strategic intent, strategic aims right, I think our perception of China would be wrong. Don't underestimate, but don't overestimate also. China is not 10 feet tall. Forget 62. China, what it has done is 62 was a forgotten story for India's youth, 660 million youth. And after Galwan today, no one respects China, no one likes China, and there is an anti-China thought process in the youth. So China is going to pay for that. No, there's a lot of social media and others saying we don't want Chinese products. If China does not get to the Indian market in the future, China will not be able to exploit its manufacturing capacities. So I'll end out here right now for this thing. And Bharat narrative is very well covered. And I would like to just point out one thing: the military power, the military asymmetry. We talk about the military asymmetry. The military asymmetry cannot be in terms of abilities only. Military asymmetry is in terms of capability also, right? And capability includes the man, the soldier. That is where our strength lies, and also the people. The people along on the land borders, whether it is Ladakh, whether it is the sector, Himachal, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Arunachal, the people are our strength, right? The Chinese don't have that strength. The Tibetans are not with China, and that is our strength, and that is where we should be very exploiting that, and we should not look at every day they come out with on the PSYOPs with the three warfare strategy, some technological development is taking place. They come out with a helicopter now today. I was reading an article which operates in high altitude areas, and it is a game changer attack helicopter. But then in the end, it says it operates at a ceiling of 2,500 meters, right? So we should be very careful on the PSYOP part of it, and that is what I would say. Perceive China, respect its strength, but understand China what it wants from India, and then meet and mitigate the Chinese challenge.
Uh, Thank you, sir. Again, somehow today, like the first part, there was a resonance between what Brig Cycle said and what I spoke on the Japanese channels. The same words which you have spoken, I spoke today afternoon in that channel, and that's available on the net. And what did I tell them? One of my first opening things to the Japanese audience was, don't overestimate China, don't underestimate China. Is put it in the right thing and respect its strength, but recognize its weaknesses. It's very often these days I find a lot of commentary that we start overestimating China, underestimating ourselves, and make a big mountain of something which doesn't exist. So I think we need to put it like the thing which you said about their Apache equivalent, which only operates up to 2,500 meters, and it's expected to operate at 4,000. It won't. So that psychological issue of China is important. Then, of course, uh, the strategic intent of China. You know, what is their perception of their strategic intent is important, which you said, like it has to be an Asian power, it has to be the only pole in Asia. It needs, it is looking at a bipolar world in which India doesn't find a place. And we'll discuss about this because this, I think, is an important issue because we're going to hit on every aspect. We're going to come across this part of the story, right? And you spoke of the smart power. And the major thing which you echoed what Brigadier Sahgal said is a lack of interdependence, or rather, the lack of dependence on China. And we don't have much interdependence. What little trade we have, which I would like to explain to everyone, everyone says that our trade with China is increasing, and that China can turn the tap off. I beg to differ because our whatever we are getting from China is fundamentally primary, items which are required for our value addition for further export, basically API and things like that, and electronics. if they do get turned off, the world is not going to end. And in any case, we are already on a path where we're going to set up our own API, slowly. Maybe 5, 6, 7 years it will happen. And as this trade grows, as much as China has a handle on us, we also have a handle on China, which everyone has to remember. And China wouldn't like to let this handle go, because the moment it lets this handle go, it loses all leverage on the LAC also. Because, and that is something which China understands well, and we also need to understand this well. Then the issue of contradiction between China and India, the issue of competition containing and conflict on one side, with the Quad being we being part of Quad, where China is directly pitted against this, and the other side is the cooperation and the commerce, which played a which played a large part, at least in the pre-COVID period, because we're still part of the BRICS and we're still part of the SCO, and the RIC is still completely not vanished. So this is a mass of contradictions which we have to contend with. But the signals from China are very clear. The signals from China is that they have started recognizing that India is a changed power and the equations are changing, and they have to change their whole attitude, and they have to go around containing India. So one thing we should be sure is that India, as much as USA is trying to contain China, China will try to contain India, and it's going to use Pakistan to do so, and Pakistan and all the other catchpaws around to do so. So this is something which has come out very clearly in the discussion so far. I'll touch upon a few issues which I thought, I'll take your considered opinion, and then move forward. The first issue which I thought I'll touch upon and I'll highlight to everyone is China's geopolitical outlook. We all know that China wants to establish a Sino-centric world order where it has to be the pole of the world, with USA, the declining USA, moving out of the equation, right? And to do that, it has to have dominance in Asia. It has to be the regional power in Asia, right? And that has it conditions China's geopolitical outlook. So, and plus, there is a traditional view that the three major powers, the global powers, are USA, India, and China. Sorry, USA, Russia, and China. And India doesn't have a play in that. So, with this as a background, how do you think China's geopolitical outlook towards India is going to get shaped, and how it's going to impact us? Brigadier Saigal, sir, your view, and then I'll take.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and uh, I may be excused for having a somewhat different perspective on this whole issue.
Fine, no problem, sir.
See,
We want that.
see, I look at China as a continental power which is trying to earn its maritime dominance through huge maritime capability development. But the fundamental point for the Chinese is this: is that in projection of power, they are getting constrained. There is a constrainment on the eastern flank by the East China Sea and the huge first island chain, which is being dominated by the US led alliance system. The problem for the Chinese is that on the western flank, there is a huge Malacca dilemma which he has to cross. So, essentially speaking, the Chinese maritime force is getting constrained in the South China Sea area alone. For breakout, it has to go beyond the Malacca Strait, and it is also the western is also the route which is its main supply route. Now, here, India's strength, capacities, capabilities will become a millstone around Chinese neck. So, therefore, in the internal discourses of China, there are two schools of thought. School number one is to teach India a lesson and use power and influence to make India capitulate or coerce India. That's one school. And unfortunately for the Chinese, the last 4 years have indicated the limitation of Chinese military power and its military coercive capabilities, primarily because they are suddenly coming to realize there are two things. There is a military power and there is a leverageable military power. How much military power can you employ? And in that employment scale, there is a near parity which is emerging on the continental domain. In the maritime domain, there is this whole issue of Quad, our partnerships with United States, Australia, and Japan to a degree, and India's own capacity building are becoming germane to the Chinese attempts at breakthrough on the western flank around the Malacca Strait. Here also, please note, I would request our analysts to note one thing. Look at the kind of capacities under Atam Nirbhar program India is developing. India is developing long-range strike, maritime strike capability in multiple of air affairs. We're developing a cruise missile. We are long-range ship-to-air missile system. We are developing hypersonic systems. We are developing an entire ecosystem which will enhances our maritime domain awareness. All these elements are part and parcel of China constraint, not really China constraint, but constraining strategy of any power which wants to come into this domain. So the Chinese dilemma is this: is a growing China, US, India's US relationships, India's growing strengths and capabilities will will ensure that the Chinese ability to project power into the Indian Ocean region in any reasonable format will become a suspect. What is China doing? China is leveraging Pakistan. It is leveraging Myanmar, trying to create a corridor into the Bay of Bengal. It is leveraging Bangladesh, creating a Bay of Bengal. It is trying to create a Bay of Bengal as a Chinese lake and put pressure on India in that area. So there is a little game which is being played. But the point at issue is this: is in larger geostrategic context, we sitting in India have to understand the dynamics of play. And once we have understood the dynamics of play, and I'm very glad there are people in our policy establishment who are developing these long range capacities and capabilities and systems, they understand this. You do not really need aircraft carriers to fighting on the this thing. You do not but you need SSBNs and other systems like K4 test, which we have not done, but will do, which will be a MERV test, will also indicate to you the ability that we are trying to create. So bottom line is that we Chinese are concerned power. Chinese are concerned power, and Chinese believe that they have a period of about 7 to 8 years to pressurize India. Now, the question basically is this for the Chinese is this: that while in this same period of pressurizing India, India is growing an economically growing power, India is becoming investment, India is becoming a darling of the global investors, and it is also closely getting integrated with the Indo-Pacific security and economic system. And this is where the China's dilemma lies. They understand that. They understand that. So the second school of thought they say, why are you being so stupid and picking up fights with India? Why are you pushing the agenda on India? India is your second most important relationship after the United States. Build up relationship with India. So there is a school of teaching India thought, and there is a school of society. Do not play your cards on the long term. See how India develops, how India evolves. Play your card. No need to pick up unnecessary antagonism with India. So these are the two schools of thought which are prevalent in China at this point in time. That's my view, because that's my reading tells me. So this is what I had to say to your question, sir.
I completely agree with you, sir. When you look at the geopolitical outlook of China, especially towards India, these are the two issues which come out. Should China teach India a lesson? And frankly speaking, I think every one of us know that the time for teaching this lesson is over. Because 2020 Eastern Ladakh proved that you can't be pushed, like what General Bhatia said. India is no pushover. You did your mirror deployment in absolutely stunning time, and we are there, right? And they tried, like you said, what they tried at Yangtze and got beaten up. In fact, that film has been put out by Mr. Shiv Arun yesterday on Twitter. It shows how our people have beaten those Chinese back at
Yes.
Yangtze, right? So that's very clear. The teaching lesson is over. The next point which you said, and which the Chinese are recognizing, is that they can't go east towards America and the Pacifics, because that is where they're then getting into the American area of strength. They they can't break the Malacca dilemma, and they're not going to get easy access into the Indian Ocean. And this is now very clear as it is emerging in the North Arabian Sea. I see this being shown out in the North Arabian Sea. And this is what I've been discussing on Gunner Shot for the past, say, 1 week. Because everyone had focus on the Indian Indo-Pacific region, in the Pacific part of the Indo-Pacific. But the actual place, in my view, is happening in the Indo part, where you see the US and the UK navies fighting out with the and sorting out the Houthis, and the Indian Navy sorting on the Somali piracy, and the PLA Navy sitting tight. While this is happening, action is happening in this area. We also see the Indian Navy starting its operations at Agalega, expanding its footprint with a expanded base at Menakoi, also having, strengthening the Andaman Nicobar Command. You've done your MERV test, like you said, the K4 test, all these are coming in. And lo and behold, where China thought it had got a foothold into Maldives, there seems to be a slight shift, because now Maldives has come back to us to say for restructuring of loan and things like that. So you see a change happening in this whole story. And this will definitely force, the way I look at it, will definitely force China to start looking at the second option of mending fences with India. And looking at, like what General Bhatia said, the Chinese look at things in the long term. So if they
Workable
have that
relationship.
long term vision, yeah, if they have that long term vision, the faster they realize that they have to do business with India, the better it is for them. And this thinking is also there well within their system. I think that was a very nice way of putting it across, sir. So, General Bhatia, sir, your views on this whole question. I mean, you can have a completely contradictory view, and I'll welcome it.
No, no, I can't have a conflict with the Brig Arun Sahgal is our mentor.
No, no,
So,
sorry. I mean, in that, not in that way. Even I don't have a contradictory. I can't have a contradictory view on both of you. The
we
point
are
is,
like
but for the pass of debate, we'll do it.
yeah, we like-minded people, like with thoughts which I could. But let me try to take it on. Your question is what shapes geopolitical outlook of China? It is very simple. Their national interests, their core national interests, their vital national interests, and their peripheral national interests. And the China dream, as stated by Xi Jinping in 2013, right? Then again reiterated 5 years later when he became the supreme leader, and then again reiterated when he became, the third time when he's done everything. So the China dream or China's core national interests, which shape the geopolitical outlook of China, and we need to study that. And Chinese have a way with words. Uh, we really need to study that. Unfortunately, most of us, and me included, when we read the Western narrative, and that's why we form opinion. But the fact remains, one of the China dreams is the BRI or One Belt One Road, or what do you call it, right? And that is what India opposed. And I feel that is what shaped the geopolitical outlook of China towards India. I'm talking about India specific now, right? So that is where I think geopolitically China is smart. It is looking at challenging the US for a bipolar world initially, and then taking over as the, it is not Asia's century, it is China's century. We talk of Asia's century, it is China's century. That's why China, I'm talking about Chinese perception, right? I'm not talking about India's,
Yes, yes,
what
sir.
we want.
No, I agree with you. We want the Chinese perception only.
The Chinese perception is it's a Chinese century, the Middle Kingdom, which is, uh, they have had a century of humiliation, not a century of power, right? So that is what is shaping the geopolitics, and China has, concerns of unification of Taiwan, unification of Outer Mongolia. It is concerns in the South China Sea. It is concerned in the East China Sea. It is concerned in Korea. It is concerned in the India-China border. Right? So it is not that China is, we talk of two-front war and two and a half front war and how India will do that. China got a six-front war.
Yeah,
Why,
forefront war
why
is
is so concerned?
officially.
Why is so concerned? Right? Geopolitically, China, China has got more problems than anyone else. It wants to Taiwan is on one side, and it has got strategic concerns. What I call the 3T, right? 3T is Tibet, Taiwan, and Turkmenistan. So we'll have to look at that. We look at China's ambitions, we look at China's national interests, and we look at China's geopolitical, how it wants to shape geopolitical. It wants to address its strategic concerns within and outside. Within is the 3Ts, and outside is the Indian Ocean region. Okay. South China Sea, East China Sea, and the Malacca Straits. So that is what I feel will shape China's geopolitics. And rightly so, it's one of the ways, and China is doing exactly that. If you look at it, domestically, internationally, outward thinking, it is doing that. It is not that we should not take China as a fool. China is really doing that. It has got many vulnerabilities which we need to understand and exploit at the right time. And that is how we need to build capacities, build capabilities, enhance capacities. And that is if we do not do now, we will be reacting like we did in 2020. We did well because we will always do well. But it is better to plan and be aware of what is going to happen, how it's going to fold out. And I'm talking the security concerns. I'm not talking of economic concerns yet. I'm not talking which
Yes, sir.
China uses military as a leverage, right? If you look at Xi Jinping's speech when it took was for the third time, he used the word security 91 times. Right, in his speech. 91 times the word security. So that is something we should take note of. These are not small things. Chinese don't do anything which is without thought. That speech must have been written, rewritten, rewritten, and so many drafts would have gone through. So we'll have to look at Chinese concerns and what concerns, strategic concerns China has, what strategic assets it has, and again, what is our aim? Our aim is to mitigate the Chinese threat. China is a threat to India. Let's not have any doubts about it. And it's always a threat to India. Militarily, today, a lot of people say, the military should have foreseen this threat. Did we not foresee it? Did we
Yeah,
not
we
raise
do.
2 degrees in 2010 for the LEC? Did we not get the sanction of the Mountain Strike Corps and the Aggression Forces in 2013? It is not that we did not see it, right? The fact is that we have priorities, uh, competing priorities at national level. Resources is the problem. And right now we are doing catch up and we are doing it very, very well. But what shapes geopolitical outlook of China is its ambitions and its national interests.
Yeah, I think you put it very nicely, sir. We cannot lose sight of the fact that China's geopolitical outlook will be, you know, based on its core national interest, its China dream, and looking at the China's century. And this is what Xi Jinping spoke in the 20th Party Congress last in October 22, right? And he spoke of security 91 times, which is important. And he's not only spoken there, he's made security a core issue even in the recent two sessions which had concluded. And I may add to it that China's geopolitical outlook is going to be conditioned hereafter by the fact that economy is no more their core concerns. Till the time Zuchin, till about the last Congress, the 20th Party Congress, they were looking at economic, being overtaking U.S. economy. I think for the past 1 year that has gone out of the equation. So many times when we start looking at the Chinese economy too much, I think we might be missing the wood for the trees. And this is what is coming out past the last two sessions. They're now looking more at being self-reliant. They're more looking at high-tech self-reliance and issues like that, which which Brigadier Sahgal said at the beginning, internal self-reliance like what India has achieved, and they will keep wondering as to how India achieved this. And this is something which is something we cannot let go. Then the major issue you said is China has its own internal concerns which shape its geopolitical outlook. Uh, the official thinking in China is that it might face a forefront war, and that forefront war, one could be against Japan and South Korea with USA. The second, of course, would be Taiwan. The third would be in the South China Sea with Australia and UK, part of the AUKUS coming up here. And the fourth front would be India. And China is worried about something called the chain reaction warfare, where if it goes aggressive against one, it will have to end up facing one or more opponents. So their geopolitical issues are also, outlook is also configured upon this entire thing. Then the vulnerabilities of the 3T, which we've been discussing, I think now for the past 4 years, of Tibet and Taiwan and Turkmenistan, right? So these are the ones which are going to guide China's outlook, and we have to see. And if you take this outlook vis-a-vis India overall, after what you have both said, China has its huge cup of woes, a bowl full of woes which has to handle. And many times we often think that China is a monolith with one thinking and one, homogeneous setup. Little bit do we realize China is a big mirror of whatever India is, right? And the contradictions which India has equally appear in some form, and maybe to a lesser degree in China. And China has its own, plate of worries, like India has. So once you start looking at that, then you realize we need to understand China better. The major thing is between the two of you, you have actually given two streams of the Chinese geopolitical outlook, which we need to understand better holistically. Now, I'll touch upon issue. Yeah,
let's not
please.
forget Hong Kong. Let's not forget Hong
Hong
Kong.
Kong, yeah, Hong Kong is something there, which is still not gone, though it has been taken as part of the national law. Everything. Hong Kong still exists to trouble China in the long run, because a monolithic China is inconsistent with these two systems. You can have one China, one system, and that is what China is actually aiming for. But then we'll leave it at that. I'll leave this geopolitical outlook. I'll come to the LAC and our border issue, which I think is the crux of the problem. After all, if the external affairs minister says, look, our relationship has gone southwards ever since the Chinese aggression in 2020, which has violated the complete lot of border agreements which we've had ever since then. And the government of India has taken that, look, we have to first address the border issue and then we'll look at the rest of the things. What do you think are the Chinese perception of how to solve this problem and how to take this forward and what we have to be aware of? That's the question. I would request Brigadier Sahgal, sir, your views on it, and then, of course, we'll follow it up with General Bhatia.
Okay. The Chinese dilemma, which I talked about earlier, was status quo versus status quo ante. I mean, the question basically is this thing is status quo is perpetuating continuation of the current scenario. Next question comes is why is China dithering on resolution of the last 2 points like the Dapsang and Chumar, and why not it coming to a similar kind of arrangement of creating no patrol zones and pull back, both sides pulling back. The second issue which is coming up is this is related to now, which has become a very in the last month, post Shela Tunnel being inaugurated by the Prime Minister. There has been four demarches to us from the Chinese. We have retaliated in a similar fashion, but Chinese are simply not letting go. They are continuing with this rhetorical this thing of this being the Chinese territory. See, the logic behind all both these things is that what is the Chinese position? How does China can China give a concession to India, and what does that concession will mean in return? What will they get in return? So the problem for the Chinese right now is this: is can it escalate? Sure, it can escalate. What does it believe that we have come discuss that does it believe that it can get a consequential uh, operational advantage apart from a tactical gain of here or there? That's a question mark. Number two is their question is what will be the escalation levels beyond that? Now India is equally poised. So the question therefore that comes about is this thing is how, or slow boil the present situation of slow boil continue and tire each other out. Situation is very clear to the Chinese that India not going to get tired out on this issue. So they are trying to develop a via media, and they will wait for a suitable time to develop a via media. Now, what is the context of that via media, particularly in the Ladakh sector is concerned? That is something which is you can turn around and say that they're making a new highway hugging the LSE to attempt to Karakoram highway, etc. are important issues. Those are not important issues. The important issue basically is this thing is pullback or no pullback, and if no pullback, how long they want intending to stay? Because like I said, the costs of coercing India are manageable by India, and India is not going to. Okay. As far as the Arunachal is concerned, the whole issue is linked to the Dalai Lama, and also the fact is that despite years of control, despite years of pouring money, despite years of creating all those fancy villages around the border, the reality of the thing is that the Tibetan population is not happy. The Tibetan population is not happy, and they are not sure about how they will react post Dalai Lama. So, in my view, this whole scenario is linked at this point in time to A, continuing to use the standoff as a coercion against India in the belief that India might like to settle. And number two is that the issue on the eastern sector will again continue to boil, and they will continue to create conditions uh, basically to ensure that they oversee the Dalai Lama's life. What happens after that is an area which is totally unpredictable for the Chinese, and they do not know what the options would be. So the question for us is that we have to continue to deal with the status quo for the next couple of years. I'm sorry, this is the prognosis that I have. You will not get Chinese will try and seek concessions from us. My suggestion would be there is no reason for India to give any concessions. Our policy is straightforward: uphold the agreements, pull back, and then we will talk. We can proceed further. You cannot create new conditions and then expect India to take forward our relationship. The relationship is essentially based on contextualized on resolution of the boundary issue. And now I think India is my view. In my view, India should not settle for anything less. We have done what we had to do. We have had a situation for the last 4 years. Now we must need settlement which is more permanent than an amorphous line of actual control which everybody can question at any time. This is all I have to say.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair one, sir. The important point which you made is the status quo as it existed earlier, as China perceived, right, to be what it is also changing. What is the status quo? We have to find a new uh, modus vivendi for this, the way I look at it and the way you explain. Standoff, continued standoff as a tool of coercion uh, is come to the stage where it's going to get diminishing returns for China. Further military action along the LAC, minor or major, might not get them the results which they seek. The larger objectives of settling the boundary issue the way they want it also might not result. Okay, and then so the their reaction to the Sela Tunnel and the PM's visit to Arunachal, they made it some kind of a prestige issue where every second day this Global Times and its spokesman would talk something about it, and they're making a big issue out of it. And it is not only they're making a big issue out of that, they're clubbing other issues and making coming out with stories. Even today they came out with something like that in the Twitter.
Yeah, I've seen that. Huh?
Yeah. Now, the point is, which I think, which is critical, is the people of Tibet. After investing so much, they're still unsure of the people of Tibet. And once, whether it is in this time, in the lifetime of Dalai Lama, or in the next, they're entering a zone of, they don't know where they're entering. And I don't think they have a full handle on this. Even if they put some, their own Dalai Lama, whether the Tibetan people will accept it the way they accepted the Panchan Lama surrogate, whoever they put, is a question mark. Even if it is accepted superficially, whether deep down something might go wrong is something which they think, which is questionable. And hence, the Chinese will be on unsure footing in Tibet as a whole. And the importance of people, which a lot of people in India. I mean, you brought out a very significant point, which I'd like to highlight to everyone. A lot of people in India and the world over have started thinking of war and conflict as a contest between technology, military power, X, Y, Z, and territory and things like that. And we have started as a whole, the military people also as a whole, discounting the value of people in conflict. And this importance of people and the value of conflict has come forth in Ukraine, and it has also come forth in
In Gaza.
the Israel Gaza affair, right? People as a major quotient of conflict, military conflict, is something we cannot ever forget. And I think this is something which we have to watch and amend our whole story, which I think General Bhatia also, sir, you made a mention of it in passing, but I think it's very important that we talk of the people. I mean, more of people in military affairs is important. So with this, though, I request your view on the subject of the border and the Chinese perception of the LAC.
I'll be very short. And the world is changing. Battle space has increased, decreased, and war space has increased. Right. What I'm trying to say is, if we look at China, and I agree with Brig Arun Sahgal totally, that Arunachal is important for Tibet. Our border in Sikkim is important for India's strategic concerns, slavery corridor, basically the Dolan Plateau Jafri Ridge. And Eastern Ladakh is important for China for two reasons: uranium and ultra pure water for semiconductors. Right. So China is not giving it away. We have to understand that.
Yeah.
We have a resolution 14 November 1962 where we have said that all our last territories have to be recouped. However, after having said that, China also wants to resolve the boundary question. Xi Jinping is a great follower of Mao Zedong. And Mao, in his avatar, had given a philosophy. Mao's philosophy was to have inclusive land borders. He did not say maritime borders, land borders. China shares 14 land borders, 14 nations, and another 13 nations it shares the maritime borders, right? And Mao said inclusive land borders. And China has resolved the land borders with 12 of the 14 nations. The two nations left are India and Bhutan. It's trying very hard to win away Bhutan. Our Prime Minister visit has been there and we covered that. So I'll not talk about it. But the fact remains that India is the only one which has stood up to China. Okay. We have to understand our strengths. Over the years, I find sometimes, everyone thinks that India is a soft country, a weak country. No, we are not weak at all. Sorry. We are a strong nation, a very strong nation. And that's our strength. And when you talk of China's, you know, aims, that is what China does not like. That is what China does not perceive. Well, it perceives India as a strong nation, right? And does not like that. It wants to weaken India politically. It wants to weaken India militarily. It wants to weaken India economically. And that is what we need to fight against. I think Brigadier Sahgal covered everything else. I will end out here. Understand China's aim. China wants ultra pure water in Aksai Chin and Saksham Valley for the semiconductors. It wants uranium, which is there. Remember, Mao Zedong took a 2 month train journey to Moscow, and he was told by that time Stalin that please, Aksai Chin has got uranium. And today we got snippets out there that there is uranium in J&K. It's not J&K, it's in Aksai Chin basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, not.
I think you made a very, very interesting point in the beginning. Battle space has decreased, so the physical battles are going to be lesser, but the war space has increased. That means the overall China India war, whether it is hot or cold or lukewarm, call it whichever temperature has increased. And this is going to be multidimensional in nature. It is going to spread across the continent and into the maritime. Already, I think the maritime extent has increased. And this is something which we have to understand and we have to behave. In fact, I have postulated, sir, earlier also that we have to now transit from the old 2.5 front mentality of the China front, the Pakistan front, and half a front of the internal problems into a extended Pakistan front, which increases the north, goes to the North Arabian Sea, and the half front is which is virtually gone. We need to have a third front, which is along the Indian Ocean region, and probably we'll have to redefine our thinking because as the perception changes and the war space increases, our own perceptions and our own concept of the fronts which we face also has to change. The next point which you made, which I think is very critical, which is a new point and which today, it just hit me as you said, and I want to put this across to everyone. China is a continental power, and which you said that earlier and you repeated now. And China is not a maritime power; it's a continental power. Just think, for a continental power which has settled its borders with 12 other countries out of the 14, right? And it has not been able to settle its border with India and Bhutan being included in the this whole story. It means something. This is the longest border after the Russian border, which it has, and it's a pure competitor in Asia, and it's not able to resolve the issues. So that puts China at a back foot, especially in a region where it needs that region for uranium and water, as you said, for its semiconductors, and it needs Eastern Ladakh for control over Tibet, the people factor, because unless it gets Tawang, it doesn't get control over the Dalai Lama and the Tibet factor. So I think this is something which is very important. Consequently to this, it recognizes India as a peer competitor and it will do everything to weaken India militarily, economically, and diplomatically. I think these things are sacrosanct, and I think these are great takeaways from this part of the discourse. So I'll come to the last point, and after this, we'll wrap up. The issue is how does India deal with this narrowing differential between India and China. Right, this is the last part, and the Chinese perception of this. We did speak of it. I would request you to take it more as a wrap up of the whole show, and especially due to the fact that as the differential is decreasing, China doesn't recognize that it is either stagnating or declining overall. And how do you think this is going to play out in this China-India equations in the future? Uh, Brigadier Saigal, sir, and you can use this as a wrap up, and then we'll get to Brigadier General Bhatia.
See, there are two schools in China on this issue. It's a very interesting issue you are raising. Uh, the academia, the think tanks are clear about one thing, is that the gap between the two are is decreasing, and like I said, one is on the rise, other and also the fact is that the in the economic competition model, China economic and technology competition, China is losing out. I'm sure you are aware of the fact that Xi Jinping has addressed a large number of American businessmen today. The whole idea basically is to kickstart. Uh, uh, so there is a paranoia in China, particularly in the Chinese Communist Party circles, about losing grip over China because of internal problems. Now, this is going to manifest itself in China taking a hard stand externally. I was just reading on the paper, I mean, external affairs minister's statement in Malaysia, where he once again reiterated that we will not compromise on the boundary issue. So this is a dilemma which the Chinese have. The Chinese dilemma basically is this: is how to deal with India, particularly when the power equations are reducing. India is emerging as a new marketplace, and conflict as an instrument of coercion. I'm not talking gray zone. I'm talking about conflict as an instrument of coercion is hardly on the cards. And added to that is that India is, in addition to its both continental and maritime conventional power, India is also taking strides in developing a fairly credible strategic capabilities. Not only MIRV, but MAV, that is the Agni Prime, which is a
Yes.
maneuverable warhead. So the question basically for the Chinese is this: is that how does it leverage power against India, or how does it coerce India? So the issue, therefore, I think one of the aspects which India has to be very concerned about is the influence operations the Chinese will launch against us. The influence operations of the Chinese are going to be utilized as also, like all of us are aware, the legal warfare and the law warfare, as we call it, etc., will be utilized against us by by trying to create a momentum in our country of trying to make Chinese 10 feet or 11 feet tall when they are not, and creating a certain degree of self-deterrence amongst at the political level. It has not worked so far, and hopefully post elections we'll have a government that will not get self-deterred. But the point to note is this: is that China will use all instruments of coercion at its disposal to undermine the political and the strategic mindset of India, rather than do anything in concrete terms on the border or otherwise. That's my take. And that's what
Thank you,
something we
sir.
have to discuss about.
Your views, sir, General Bhatia. So then I'll sum up at the end.
Thank you. We talk of essential element national power dying diplomatically, informational, military, and economic. China, we talk of 5 times China's GDP and things like that. But something we don't talk about is the people, right? The culture. And that is where I think our strength is. China is a, if I may say so, a fragile people, a fragile society. We don't know much of China because we used to call it bamboo curtain and all that. The fact remains when you talk of asymmetry in narrowing, we should factor in the people. The strength of the people is, I think, tremendous, absolutely, and that is where our strengths lie. When you talk asymmetry, or we should also factor in the people and the society, and we are one as a China is concerned. China is divided, and we talked about earlier also. So I do feel that when you talk about China, we should take a very pragmatic view of China. China's strengths, technological strengths, military strength, economic strengths, but the cultural sense and the strength of people is with India. And that is where I think we can stand up to China. And we have stood up to China always. And we stood up very well to China post 62. Even 62 also, I think we did a reasonable job. Reasonable. Right? So if we don't stand up to a bully, the best thing about a bully is if you stand up to a bully, he withdraws very fast. It's like a dog barking at you. If you get scared, he'll keep barking at you. But if you, were to threaten him, he'll put his tail under this thing, and that is where Ganesha sitting on that dragon's tail comes to your mind.
Yeah.
I do feel we're doing well with China, but let's be very pragmatic about the whole thing. Let us build capabilities in the long term, enhance capacities, and it's it's not right to make China an enemy. It's an adversary, fine, right? And China also has to understand that its long-term interests lie with India at the cost of reputation. I think 2020 April May was China's Himalayan blunder, and I do feel China realized that because if China has to grow, it has to grow with India. You grow together or you sink together. India don't want to sink, but China is fragile, and that is where China's vulnerabilities are. I'll end out there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think some interesting points have come up in this whole thing today. Uh, we're now looking at a paranoia within China, within the Communist Party, because they might be losing grip over its people due to many factors. And this is I've spoken of in many of my podcasts, due to declining population, due to the youth being disillusioned about the communist model, and etc., etc., etc. So the people part of it. So the People's Republic of China might not be so much people's oriented as Mao probably thought, and Mao's days of strong arming are probably gone. So they have their own issue. As a result, they're going to be hard externally, and that is being manifested, and that was very clear in the recently concluded two sessions outcomes also. Right. Coming to India, there's a clear dilemma as to how they're going to deal with India. And the dilemma is that coercion model and the bullying model is out of the window virtually. And like what Vinod Bhatia said, India has stood up to China uh, consistently. It is something which we have not realized this within ourselves. In 62, though we couldn't stand up to them in the eastern sector, but definitely in the northern sector, in the Aksai Chin area, at a point of time we did stand up to them, and that's why we have what we have there. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had that also, right? But after that, you look at 64, 67, the Natula incident. We stood up to them and gave them a bloody nose. You look at the Wangdong incident. We completely outflanked China, and we occupied all the heights on the LAC. One of the issues, one of the problems which China has with us in that part of the territory is that India has adopted a forward policy and has occupied all the heights, and China doesn't have a foothold there, and it puts China at a disadvantage. And this is one of the places where China really can't coerce. And the weak coercion factor which came in at Yangtze was roundly beaten back. And like we know now, the military option is virtually out of the window. It is more the diplomatic option, the economic option, and other options. And one of the ways to achieve those options is constant influence operations, constant pre warfare strategy, constant gray zone tactics. And this is something which we have to understand. Constant needling through Pakistan. This is something which we have to factor in our mind and take as we go forward. And the fragile people of China is something we need to understand more. We need to pay more attention to this, because if we understand the fragility within China, we will know that how to deal with the hard exterior. And like self and General Bhatia, we discussed this great program called the Himalayan Blunder. And China created that Himalayan blunder of doing what it did in 2020. In doing so, I may dare say it handed over the initiative to us, because it enabled India to bounce back, regain strategic confidence, and regain many things which we were not able to do before that. In a matter of 4 years, if today we are talking of some kind of parity, despite the fact that their economy is 5 times our size, X, Y, Z, right? We are saying that the difference between, you know, the India and China are reducing, it is because they handed over the strategic confidence back to us. And to a large extent, I feel China is losing that strategic confidence against India. If I look at it over the past 4 to 5 years, it doesn't mean that I, before I end and take answers, questions, I'd like to say that what we started this whole story with, we neither overestimate China nor do we underestimate China. We need to deal with China the way China behaves and the way it is. And if I may say in the end, we must understand GDPs don't win wars or battles. It is militaries which do. GDPs are only a measure of how nations grow for the welfare of their own people. If China, with all its huge GDP, is not able to take care of the welfare of its people equitably, and people are its main fragility with all this GDP, there's a great fragility in China which we need to understand, and that is being manifested in its external hardness. So, thanks a lot. We've had a tremendous discussion. I'd like to take a few questions, and I'll keep it short because we've spent a lot of time on this. But notwithstanding, I thought it was a great discussion. This is the question which is there. Brigadier Sir, if the question is reversed, what is our perception of China, and what are the views of three panelists tonight? What I would pass this question on to Brigadier Arun Sahgal, and how do we deal with it?
I think we have covered this issue quite a lot.
No, well, we,
I
we
mean,
just put a summary to it, sir.
okay, the bottom line basically is there is no doubt China is a major power. No doubt that China is a major economy. But the perception from our side is this, that Chinese ability to leverage that power against us, like it did in the past, is greatly reduced, and is important for us to stay the course, maintain our political, diplomatic, and economic potential to deal with China, and we should not be too overly concerned about China's. We should not get self-deterred over China. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. There's a question, sir. General Bhatia, you could take it. The fact of the matter, as I understand, is that China has crossed swords with the USA and challenged its supremacy as a unipolar power in the world. Does China have the capability? I'll add a frame to this. The frame is, can China try to achieve unipolar capability without achieving Asian dominance and the problems it faces in doing so?
I think I'm an Indian. Let's look at India's interests.
Yes, sir. Let's
This
look at
balance,
it that
this balance of power game between China and US in India's interest. If we are smart, okay, there's a balance of power game going on between China and US, but we should look at a balance of interests, right? And we should, let me go a step further. We should look at the balance between the balance of power and balance of interests. So it's a good thing for India if China and US are challenging itself, right? And we should leverage that to our interests. We are a great nation. We got to look after 1.4 billion people. Their well-being is important. And it is okay if China is challenging the US. US also is, वो दूध का धुला नहीं है वो भी, putting very bluntly. So we have to be very India-centric. Don't be anti-China. Be pro-India. It's okay to feel, I feel hurt when China does what to. But let me also at the same time say our policy should not be anti-China. It should be pro-India. If China and US are fighting itself, let them fight. Let's extract the best for India. So that's my view. It's a very, very pragmatic one, down to earth one. Be pro-India. Let the world go where it's going.
Fine, sir. The last question which I'll take, sir, and both of you could answer, anyone could answer this, is USA really scared of getting together with China and thus want them to be in conflict? General Sahgal, sir, Brigadier Sahgal, sir, your choice, your take.
I'm sorry, I'm a
Because
bit
you
of a
dealt with.
contrarian. I'm a bit of
No,
a
fine, no
contrarian.
problem, sir. No, I am okay with it.
Down the line, it suits the United States' interest to ensure China remains our critical challenger and an adversary. It suits the Americans because that creates a strategic balance in the American favor. Uh, right now, for next 5 to 10 years, 50 years, or 10 to 15 years, United States will look at India as a very credible strategic partner. But once you start growing big, you also become a credible economic power, technological power, and correlated in comprehensive national terms, a military power. You will have much greater differences and of interest. So to an extent, like the guy said, you have no permanent friends, you have only permanent interests. So India's
Interest.
interest lies is to be a good, strong partnership and a consequential partnership with the United States at this particular point in time as a leverage against China, which allows us growth and development. In future, we must also know how the global balance of power is shifting and take steps accordingly.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot, Akash, you for your comment that it's a very interesting talk on the subject. And of course, I'd like to welcome Tripathi as a new member. Uh, I won't take any more questions, sir, but I thought today we had a great discussion on China's perception of India and how India needs to accordingly factor its own growth and factor its rise and react to it so that our rise is not impeded. Fundamentally, we are looking at how we have to grow. It's not how China breaks or how China, what happens in China is of least consequence to me as far as I continue my growth. The way, if all of us look back, say 3, 4, 5 years back, we were all concerned about Pakistan. No, Pakistan is caught up in its own internal problems, and we're not bothered about it, and we are growing. And the lesser we think of Pakistan, as Pakistan keeps chewing in its own juices, it gives us an opportunity for growth, right? The same way as China gets into its own problems or its own quagmire, and has whatever happens in China, as far as I get the opportunity to grow, I'm a happy man. And at this point of time, the fact that China is not going to get into a quagmire is not going to happen so easily. And China is already a grown power. It is on your doorstep. It is appearing in the Indian Ocean region, and its growth is contingent upon the fact how it can contain India. And to that extent, we need to understand China more so that our own growth path is clear. With this, though, if there's anything else either one would like to say, it's fine. Otherwise, we'll call it a day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Right.
much.
Thanks a
Thanks
lot,
for
sir.
inviting me.
Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
sir. I thought we had
Very
a tremendous,
tremendous and a good learning process for me. Thank you.
yeah, I thought we had a tremendous discussion on this subject, which is not often looked at. we need to know what's happening on the other side of the Himalayas and far beyond the other side of Himalayas and well into Yangtze Valley and the Yellow River to know where the problems are coming from, and so that our own growth is unimpeded. And I'd like to mention to everyone who's watched this, if your questions are not answered, please put your questions in the normal comments. I'll pick them up, and over the Sunday I'll answer all of them one by one. I'll take time for it. Thanks a lot. Good evening. Jai Hind to you, sirs, and Jai Hind to all the audience. Thanks a lot once again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much. Thank you. God
Thank
bless
you
you.
very much, Jai to your audience. Jai. Thank you. Thank you, sir.